Hey everyone, I'm Tony Lyons, president of Maha Action. Welcome to the Maha Media Hub. Today we're going to dig into some of the issues that are driving this movement and hear from some of the people actually making change happen on the ground every single day. We don't always agree on the conclusions, and we have lots of people on today who disagree with each other. But that's a good thing. That's Maha. That's science, not propaganda. That's what makes us powerful and important, because we believe in dialogue and debate, and that's real science. Let's start with radical transparency. Something Secretary Kennedy has talked about a lot, and something we're finally starting to see in action. This week, the FDA formally put drug companies on notice. You are legally required to post your clinical results at ClinicalTrials.gov, where any American can see them. That includes the results that show risks, side effects, and outright failures. And as FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary made clear, a lot of these companies just haven't been doing that. They've been sitting on data they're required to share, and that stops now. This is what restoring accountability to our health system actually looks like. On that same note, Senator Ron Johnson just blew the lid off something that should make every American angry. In a letter to Secretary Kennedy, he revealed that the Biden CDC knew that Pfizer's bivalent COVID booster was linked to ischemic strokes in people over 65. He knew it, and he said nothing. He just hid it from the public. If you want to understand what the opposite of transparency looks like, that's your example right there. Senator Johnson is going to walk us through the whole thing today. We're also going to talk about cell towers and who gets to decide where they go. This really matters. There's currently a proposal at the FCC that would take that decision away from local communities entirely. And we think that's wrong. People deserve a voice in what gets built in their own neighborhoods. And the science here really just isn't settled. Back in 2021, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that the FCC hadn't properly looked at the health evidence around radio frequency radiation and sent the whole thing back for review. That review still isn't finished. And Secretary Kennedy has decided this constant exposure to wireless radiation as the ultimate environmental toxin, something that operates at the cellular level that we can't see or smell and that we're surrounded by 24 hours a day. We're not saying ban everything. We're not saying ban anything. We don't believe in bans. We're saying slow down, do the real science, and let communities have a say. We're also getting into homeopathy today. Millions of Americans use it, millions of Americans benefit from it, and yet it keeps facing regulatory obstacles that have nothing to do with whether or not it works, and everything to do with the medical establishment that wants to maintain a monopoly on what counts as legitimate medicine. Maha's position is simple. We follow the evidence wherever it goes. We don't pick winners before the race is run. And every American deserves the information they need to make their own personal decisions about their own health. That's informed consent. Today's guests are Dr. Mehmet Oz, the administrator of CMS, Miriam Eckenfels from Children's Health Defense, from their EMR and wireless program, Rachel Roberts, chief executive at the Homeopathy Research Institute, and then vaccine scientist and inventor Dr. Robert Malone, and finally, Wisconsin congressional candidate Michael Afonso. And then, of course, we've got our regular contributors, Gary Brecka and Russell Brand. So let's get started with Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson. He was one of the first people in Washington to question the COVID response, to stand up for people injured by the vaccine, and to hold serious hearings on everything from America's broken nutrition policies to the corruption inside vaccine science. Senator Johnson, thanks for coming on again.
Well, thanks, Tony. Thanks for everything you do within the Maha movement here. I'll just give everybody a little bit of a history lesson here. Throughout the Biden administration, I've been holding, first of all, hearings when I was chairman of Homeland Security on early treatment. But then once we lost the majority, all I could really do is hold public events. And so I was holding public events, giving the vaccine or the injection injured platforms to tell their story so that they could be seen, heard, and believed and seek treatment. But throughout that entire Biden administration, we were completely stonewalled in terms of providing information documents to our oversight requests. As I was watching the VAERS reports and I was watching deaths and serious adverse events skyrocket with the VAERS, knowing that the VAERS dramatically understates the number of adverse events, as I would write oversight requests to the Biden administration, completely stonewalled. They denied hot lots. They denied seeing anything. They would not give us the information on their statistical analysis of the VAERS report. It was only once President Trump got elected and Bobby Kennedy came into office as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, guaranteeing radical transparency, that we started getting documents. Now, I will say that the people under Bobby, the burrowed in deep staters, are not particularly cooperative. But, Bobby, living up to that commitment, did force them to deliver us what ended up being close to 11 million pages of documents. And what we have done with those is it's not easy to sift through there. Even with this sophisticated AI, it's difficult to get the information you want. But here's what we've discovered so far. Early on, we discovered that CDC saw a signal for myocarditis and hid it. They downplayed it. Here we are, a number of months later, and we now have evidence that the same CDC had, for week after week after week, at the tail end of 2022 into 2023, they had a safety signal using their sophisticated modeling, empirical Bayesian analysis. They had a safety signal for ischemic stroke in people over 65. Once again, what do? Did they announce that to the public? No, they hid it. They downplayed it. And so we wrote a letter, very detailed letter to HHS, requesting more documents. What's being overlooked in that letter is the other thing we've uncovered is the CDC was well aware of the effect of masking. Early in the process, in early 2021, they understood that their analysis was subject to masking. Let me quick describe it. You've got Pfizer and you have Moderna, two very similar platforms. When they compared the adverse events using their sophisticated analysis of a Pfizer vaccine, they compared them to Moderna and all of the vaccines. When they looked at Moderna, they compared Moderna to Pfizer and all of her vaccines. So if you had a lot of adverse events in either Moderna and or Pfizer, it would mask the adverse events in the others. I know it's not the easiest concept, but the bottom line, they knew that their analysis of VAERS, even though just VAERS without analysis was screaming safety signals, right? I mean, we're up to almost 39,000 deaths worldwide reported, millions of adverse events. We have the vaccine industry, people like Kyle going public, telling their stories. And yet our federal health officials to this day are denying vaccine injuries or injection injuries from the COVID injection. And so to me, that is the bombshell. They knew their analysis systems would mask the adverse events. We now have people we are talking to. We are getting interviews. We're going to hold a hearing at the end of April, really talking about the ischemic stroke. But we'll bring in some experts on masking, try and make this as understandable to the public. But we are only at the beginning of this investigation to uncover the cover-up. It was a coordinated, it was a grotesque cover-up. The CDC was well aware of the fact that they were using a system that they knew would hide, would mask adverse events. And even when that masking process didn't fully hide them and safety signals still emerged, then they would hide those safety signals. But I mean, we are talking about masking, and they were aware of the fact they were masking, severe masking on something like 49 different adverse events. 25 of them were produced, significant safety signals, including sudden death and stroke. So this is all going to come out. Again, we've got to go through the process of transcribed interviews. I've requested interviews with people who worked the CDC. Those take time. People start getting lawyered up. But we're on the case, Don, because of Bobby Kennedy's commitment to radical transparency. We're finally getting the documents. And I'm just hoping that this is going to open up the floodgates to expose exactly what happened during the Biden administration and literally the capture and the corruption of these federal agencies under the Biden administration.
Thanks so much, Ron. It just really is crazy that there were, strokes, that there was sudden death, that there were so many side effects, that they knew about it, that they didn't do anything, that they didn't tell us. And it's so clear that, Bobby is fighting day and night for radical transparency. And these battles are just not going to be easy. And people have to recognize that he's up against some of the most powerful people on the planet, some of the most powerful companies, and that, this is going to be a tough fight. And we're grateful to you for standing up, for fighting for them, from the very beginning, fighting for the people who have suffered so much as a result of a lack of transparency. And so we're going to fight right alongside you. We're fighting right alongside Bobby Kennedy. And we think it's possible to win these kinds of battles and to have greater transparency and to make sure that this kind of thing never happens in the future. So thanks again for coming on.
I appreciate all your efforts. Have a great day.
You too. Next up, we have Miriam Eckenfels. She's an international lawyer and public health advocate. She serves as director of the EMR and wireless program at Children's Health Defense, where she leads efforts focused on litigation, policy, and advocacy related to wireless radiation and its health and environmental impacts. Thanks so much for coming on, and welcome, Miriam Eckenfels.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tony mentioned in his introduction, I would like to talk about one of the fastest growing and least acknowledged environmental toxins affecting our children's health today: electromagnetic radiation. We also call it wireless radiation or RF radiation or cell phone radiation. There's many names, but specifically, I'd like to talk about the involuntary exposure to this type of radiation from cell towers and antennas that are installed in our neighborhoods, often right next to our homes and our schools. This might not be on everyone's top of mind, but fighting against EMR and wireless harm is a primary pillar of Secretary Kennedy's vision for Maha. He has been working in this space and litigating for decades. HHS actually announced in January that it is forming a committee of independent scientists that will summarize the current science on the health effects of wireless radiation and then make recommendations. And they really want to drive the conversation into the mainstream. And we are seeing them roll this out now. But at the same time, we're seeing a major shift at the federal level because the FCC and Congress are moving aggressively towards what they call permitting reform to remove regulatory barriers in order to rapidly expand wireless infrastructure, including cell towers, 5G small cells, and antennas directly into residential neighborhoods, often super close to homes and schools where our children spend the majority of their time. Under the current system, under the current regulatory framework, however, when a telecom company wants to place a wireless facility, there are local safeguards in place. And these are common sense things like providers must notify nearby residents that a cell tower is coming. They must justify the need for a new cell tower. They have to consider less intrusive alternatives. And they have to go through a local democratic process where communities can object, especially when a tower is proposed in an inconvenient or impossible location, such as right next to a home or right next to a school or on a playground. And these safeguards exist for a reason: to protect our communities. But the proposed FCC rules, and there's also legislation moving through Congress, would eliminate most of these protections. They would remove notice requirements, for example, so that people would only learn of a cell tower when the trucks show up. They would limit local authority and prevent communities from considering impacts like property values or whether sufficient coverage in an area already exists. So again, it's not against technology. It's about common sense safeguards. And all of this is happening within an already very restrictive federal framework. Most people don't know that federal law prohibits local governments from denying cell tower application based on the health and environmental effects of RF radiation. At Children's Health Defense, we believe this is an unacceptable path forwards. Why do we believe that? Because the science is pretty clear. Despite industry claims to the contrary, wireless radiation has significant negative health effects. Tens of thousands of studies have linked wireless radiation to increased oxidative stress, DNA damage, cancer, neurological harm, sleep disruption, fertility issues, and most recently, even to an increased risk of diabetes in children. And children are especially vulnerable because of their developing nervous system. They have smaller heads, thinner skulls, their brains are still developing, so they need extra protection. And these biological effects occur far below the FCC's so-called safe exposure limit. Tony mentioned this in his introduction as well, that in 2021, a federal court ruled that the FCC had failed to adequately explain why its RF exposure guidelines. Those are standards that are over 30 years old. Like, we are talking standards that have been developed when everyone still had flip phones. And they failed to explain how these standards protect people and the environment. And that keeping these standards as they are while not taking into consideration all of the scientific evidence is arbitrary and capricious. The court ordered the FCC to provide a reasoned explanation for why its outdated limits still protect the public. And that was in 2021. We're in 2026 now. So over 5 years later, the FCC has done nothing. And yet, instead of complying with the court order, the FCC and Congress are pushing to accelerate deployments and strip communities of their remaining protections. And we believe that until the FCC complies with the court order and updates its exposure standards based on science, there should be no further federal actions accelerating wireless expansion, and certainly no removal of existing local control. Congress should be exercising oversight and not clearing the way for industry. In light of HHS's recent announcement to do the systematic review, and in light of Bobby's statements voicing his concerns over the health effects of 5G cell towers and cell phones, we strongly want to urge the FCC and federal decision makers to use precaution and not acceleration as a policy, because local control matters. It is where democracy happens, it is where people have a voice, and it is where we as families and parents can protect our homes, schools, and most importantly, our children. And our children's health has to come first. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And, we obviously need these kinds of safeguards, and we need people like you who are talking in ways that are practical, that have common sense. People need to have notice. They need the opportunity to debate. They need the opportunity to offer better ways to solve these kinds of problems that protect people, not big corporations. So thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for the work you're doing, and I hope you'll keep us updated.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Rachel Roberts, and she's qualified as a first-class honors degree in biological sciences. And she followed that up with training as a homeopathic practitioner, qualifying in 1997. She was in private clinical practice and lectured in homeopathy for 14 years. Then she moved to the field of homeopathic research, becoming chief executive of the Homeopathy Research Institute in 2010. The Institute is dedicated to advancing homeopathic research at an international level and is widely recognized as the #1 research on, worldwide in this area. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, Rachel, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for the invitation, and it's good evening from London. I think it's 9:15 here. Great to be joining you. So just in case anyone listening is not already familiar with homeopathy, people describe it as a natural or holistic medicine, but officially it's categorized as a form of TCIM, that's traditional, complementary, and integrative medicine. It's used all over the world by about 200 million people, it's been estimated, and used consistently for 200 years now. It's a highly individualized medicine, with each prescription being bespoke to the patient in front of you based on their exact symptoms at that moment. The medicines are non-toxic, and it can be used alongside conventional healthcare for both acute and chronic conditions. So moving straight on to the science around it, homeopathy is a controversial topic. So as you often see with anything controversial, there's a lot of myths, a lot of misinformation on this. And the thing I hear most often that drives me a little bit crazy is when people say there is no scientific evidence that it works. That is completely untrue. We do have high quality evidence showing homeopathic medicines have beneficial effects. There are around 300 randomized controlled trials published in the scientific literature. These are your classic gold standard type of studies, as some people still consider them, the ones that would be used to test conventional drugs against something like a placebo or another treatment. Within that data set, there are multiple high-quality examples of positive studies, basically comparing homeopathy to placebo and showing that the group receiving homeopathy improved more than the placebo group. So this is really standard science. There are examples for this in the treatment of hay fever, sinusitis, tonsillitis, hormonal conditions like PMS or menopause, even some of the complications after breast surgery in breast cancer patients. So if you ever hear anyone saying there's no evidence or we've never been able to show it works better than placebo, it is completely untrue. But what I get asked a lot is, what do I feel is the most compelling evidence we have on this topic? And for me, it isn't one study. I do, of course, have some favorite studies. You can't help it. But for me, it's more what I call the mosaic of evidence across all the subfields. When you look at this field in its broadest sense as a totality, that is when it's most fascinating and compelling. And what I mean by that is we do have high quality studies in veterinary homeopathy. We have laboratory studies testing these medicines on plants, on cells. We even have experiments now, it's an emerging area in agriculture. So testing homeopathic medicines as alternatives to toxic substances in agricultural crops. So I did think, if I'm allowed just one real study, specific study, in 2024, there was a publication of an experiment done in Brazil under greenhouse conditions, randomized control, placebo, blinded, everything, testing homeopathic substances on strawberry crops. And what it found is that not only did it increase the yields and the sort of bio-vitality of the strawberry crops, but it also increased resistance to disease. And that is a huge finding because, of course, crops like strawberries have become extremely toxic because of the pesticides. So this is just the very beginning of seeing whether homeopathy might be a viable option in future to reduce the use of toxic pesticides. So huge potential implications for sustainability, for the environment, and of course, human health. But that might seem a little bit abstract to people listening. If you're someone, either you use homeopathy already and you're curious what the data is around it, or you're thinking of trying it for the first time, I think what you really want to know then is, if I go and see a homeopath, how likely is it to help me or not? What kind of data do we have around that? And there have been some really good studies done in Europe, where, of course, homeopathy is much more widely used. In France, most famous study of this kind, which for real-world effectiveness or an observational study, followed 8,500 patients treated by 800 physicians. And what they found was that the patients who were treated by doctors trained in homeopathy got the same or similar outcomes to the patients treated just with conventional medicine, but crucial difference, they used far fewer pharmaceutical drugs. And the biggest findings in this, in terms of public health, was that for patients with anxiety and depression, there was a 71% reduction in psychotropic drugs. And for URTIs, upper respiratory tract infections, there was a 57% reduction in the need for antibiotics, but getting the same clinical results. So again, huge potential for public health here. And these kind of findings were mirrored in other studies done in the UK, Germany, and Italy. So that's about as much as I thought I could cram into my little session with you today. If you would like more information about research on homeopathy, please do follow us, HRI, on social media, or you can check out our website, click on our FAQs, or you can download an evidence summary from there. Thank you so much.
Rachel, thanks so much for coming on and teaching us more. You know, we clearly need every option in our toolkit when we're trying to make people healthy in this country. And we have to look at the real science, not rely on the so-called experts who failed us for the last generation. And, you know, we can't really count on conflicted corporate science, captured government agencies. We need to keep looking at the studies. And like you pointed out, there are lots of really good studies out there. The science is not settled. That's never true. There's always going to be more science, and we need to keep coming back to that this is a good option. This is something that should be considered by everybody and should be covered and should be taken seriously. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Russell Brand. He is he's a beautiful human being, and he's a Maha warrior, an incredible writer and a believer. And he's used his massive platform to question mainstream narratives about everything, including health and wellness, which is truly God's work. And he's the author of an incredible new book, How to Become a Christian in 7 Days. He's been a great backer of Maha, the Maha movement, a fighter for justice, for clarity, for transparency, and as you'll learn in this book, for Jesus Christ. So thanks so much for coming on again.
Tony, thank you so much. You're so kind with your introductions, as is often the case. I've just finished doing my live show, and I'm extremely grateful to you for your support with this book. Thanks a lot, man. I've not done a book like this ever before, where I've just written it on my own without, often, to tell you the truth, is the entertainment industry turned you into a bit of a scammer. Do you know, or maybe it didn't turn me into a scammer. Maybe I've always been one, sort of a hustler, maybe because of where I'm from and because of the fact that I come from a background of drug addiction. And then from that, and poverty actually, and from that became sort of well off and famous and everything. I've always looked at things as a little bit of a hustle and found it kind of hard. I don't find it hard to tell the truth, but I sometimes find it hard to be sincere. And this book is a very sincere book. And I was affected. What I mean by that is I'm not trying to cover nothing. I'm not trying to hide anything. And I feel like that he holds all the answers. Jesus does, I mean. Even say with this, I know what Maha is and what Maha is about and what the point of Maha is, that it seems to me that it's in order to ensure that the message that created a movement around Secretary Kennedy continues to be successful and heard, even when one might imagine, this is not something I've got inside information on, has both the restriction of an incredible burden of duty, but also the institutional restrictions that one starts to understand accompany access to power, the inability to speak openly on certain topics. Anyway, so I became Christian at the end of the pandemic. The pandemic afforded me the opportunity to tell the truth about some things that now I think a lot more people understand is true. I can't imagine there are many people that today, if the pandemic was repeated, would take the vaccines in the numbers that they did. I can't imagine that there are many people that have much faith in the clinical trialing process of companies like Pfizer and Moderna. That's not to say that pharmacology hasn't created many, many successful medicines over the years, but it just seems to me to be, as so many things are, one of the ways you can trace mass corruption. You can do it through food, you can do it through the military, you can do it everywhere because it's fully immersive and totally ubiquitous. Human beings are fallen. Me and you, we're all broken. And if we don't own this brokenness and turn away from the worldly salve, which is to bolster your own identity and your own sense of importance according to the metrics of the world, if we don't turn away from that, we become participants in sin. We become participants in deepening corruption. In Christ, this is how I understand it. This is what I want you to understand. It's not like I believe in some external lacedon ecclesiastical entity, some synecdoche for morality and ethics. No. In me, something changed. I've always believed in God. I've believed in God for a long time because I've taken a lot of psychedelics and I've seen that what I consider to be the reality derived from sensory experience is not reality. I've always believed in God because when I stopped taking drugs, I saw that how surrendering to a power greater than myself, allowing that power to direct my life, would save me. I've always believed in God because I'm a father of beautiful children and I've experienced the profound love and the profound pain that any parent will be familiar with, because you can't live their lives for them and you can't prevent their deaths. I feel that what's happened, one of the consequences of global imperialism, which is the sort of, if you ask me, the major narrative that we have to address, even in a time of potential war and Armageddon, is that we've been extracted from reality and put into a false reality. And that's a biblical position too. When you are in sin, you're in death. Some of the etymology of the word sin in the original Greek, in which much of the New Testament, all of the New Testament would have been written, is a kind of formlessness, a kind of terrible neutrality. In this state of neutrality, we are subject to nihilism. And nihilism is not nothingness, even though the creed posits a kind of blankness at its center. Nihilism is destructive. Those kind of faiths, as C.S. Lewis points out, that sort of claim to be superior to Christianity, more advanced, e.g., Buddhism, with the kind of idea that there's a vibrant nothingness. I'm not attacking, if you are Buddhist, I'm not criticizing Buddhism. I'm saying that you have a personal identity and God has a personal identity. God's personal identity is not exhaustive, i.e. there is God beyond the person of Jesus, because there's God the Father and there is God the Holy Spirit. But all of God's character is displayed in the figure of Christ. And yet for all of this power, he's accessible to you or me in exactly the same way. Furthermore, in heaven, there is no man, there is no woman. We transcend these identities. Identity politics is not wrong because it goes too far. It's wrong because it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't recognize that you are truly unique. You, just actual you who you are. There are a couple of gay people I know. Some of you will know them from the Maha movement. She wrote a real good book. She's a gay lady, huh? And there are things in scripture that offer censure around sexuality. But as I was told, the main things are the plain things and the plain things are the main things. We're here to love one another. We're here to primarily ensure that we are in alignment with God, that we may receive his wisdom. We're here to serve one another as Christ served us up until the point of death. We're here to allow him to take our shame. In this state of fear and shame that the world engenders, we cannot progress and we cannot succeed. That's why they work so hard to keep us divided and afraid. In the person of Christ, in the God that is Christ, transcendence is available to you, but also an intimate, present God. It's the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me, and it's happened to me in the hardest time in my life, when I thought my child would die and when I knew my life was over as a celebrity because I was accused of rape and sexual assault, things I'm standing trial for towards the end of this year. And if justice is real, and I believe justice is real, I will be exonerated and acquitted, and I will dedicate the rest of my life to the work I've begun in this book, because it doesn't exclude anything. It doesn't exclude, oh, right, that's good. Look at that, yet another miracle. It doesn't prevent us from loving one another. It doesn't prevent us from eating good food. It doesn't prevent us from confronting the giants that have taken control of even your country, which I consider potentially to be a New Jerusalem. A New Jerusalem. William Blake once imagined that might be the UK, but it's easier for me to envisage it as your country, the United States. And I pray that Christians will do their duty, move towards God and carry his message wherever possible. Needn't exclude any of us or degenerate a single one of us. Thanks, Tony, for letting me write this book. Please get it if you want. Tony, I don't think I'm going to make no money from it. I'm just going to use the money to do good things. I'll say it publicly in case I change my mind later and go, no, I want the money. Oh, shit, why did I say that? And I've said it publicly.
Well, I hope you make a fortune, because you really represent a different form of radical transparency. And it's a transparency about belief and about faith. And it's one thing to have faith in God. It's another thing to have blind faith in authority, blind faith in corrupt institutions. And that leads to sort of disillusionment and cynicism that can destroy us all. So we need to restore faith. And you're doing just an incredible job, both in religion through this book and in politics. And you're doing it in all kinds of ways, but you're doing it through your lyrical and poetic nature and the beauty of your expression, whether it's verbal or written. So I'm just so grateful to have you keep on coming on, to be getting to know you, and to be part of the process of disseminating your words.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Tony. God bless you. Thank you.
You too.
Yeah.
Next up, we have my friend, Dr. Robert Malone, and he is one of the most important voices for medical freedom and informed consent. And he's been instrumental in exposing the corruption in our medical establishment. He's a physician, an inventor, a scientist, a bioethicist, and a journalist. And he's also, he is also the author of multiple titles, multiple books, including the seminal book, Psy Wars. So thanks so much for coming on for, I think, the 28th time.
28th. Well, thank you for having me, Tony. I'm here in Ron Johnson's office. We were having conversations earlier about these amazing documents that he and his staff are working on. So I'd like to talk to you about microplastics today, folks. And let's start off. I want to ask you something. When did you last eat plastic? If you had a meal today, you ate plastic. If you drank water, you drank the plastic. Scientists now estimate that the average American consumes the equivalent of one credit card worth of microplastic particles every single week through our food, our water, the air in our own homes. This is not a fringe theory. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is peer-reviewed science published in some of the most respected medical journals in the world. And the findings are serious. What does the research show? In March 2024, the New England Journal of Medicine published a landmark study. Researchers operated on patients. They operated on patients to remove plaque from their arteries. And in that plaque, they found microplastics embedded in it. To quote from the journal, the patients who had plastic in their arteries were significantly more likely to suffer a heart attack, a stroke, or death in the 2 years that followed. This is not an animal study. This is direct human evidence of harm. Stanford researchers have since shown that microplastics get inside the cells lining our blood vessels and trigger major changes in how our genes behave. Other research has found microplastics in human brain tissue, in placenta, and in the blood of newborns. The smallest particles cross the placental barrier. Our children are being exposed even before they're born. The biological mechanisms at work here are inflammation, oxidative stress, hormonal disruption, and DNA damage. These are the same pathways behind heart disease, cancer, and infertility. The same conditions we have watched rise steadily, decade after decade. So why does this matter for Maha? Here's what I want you to sit with. Parents who raised concerns about plastics in baby bottles, in food packaging, in water supplies were dismissed. This is a familiar story to all of you. They were called alarmists. They were called conspiracy theorists. The regulatory agencies said it was under control. Read ahead. It was not under control. The FDA still permits an enormous range of plastics in food contact materials. The plastic shedding from your to-go container, your coffee cup lid, your water bottle, all unregulated. Meanwhile, chronic disease rates have climbed for decades, rising cancer, rising infertility, rising autoimmune conditions, all of which have been linked to microplastic exposure. The research is now catching up to what many of us long suspected. The environment we were told was safe wasn't safe. Question is, what can you do? You cannot eliminate your exposure, but you can reduce it significantly starting today. We've done this on the farm. We've switched a lot of our containers, almost all of them now, to mason jars. Switch to glass or stainless steel for food and water. Never heat food in plastic. Do not take that plastic container or that plastic bag and put it in the microwave because heat accelerates shedding. Filter your tap water, which typically has far fewer microplastics than bottled water. Buy whole foods and cook at home. Choose natural fibers over synthetic clothing. And for parents with young children, glass bottles, not plastic. Minimize plastic teething toys. These early exposures matter most because that's when developing organs are most valuable. Feel like you heard this before? You have. We did not wait for a perfect body of evidence before removing lead from paint and gasoline. We saw the signals, we understood the stakes, and we acted. This is exactly what is needed now. We need policymakers willing to regulate plastic in food contact materials. We need independent research free from industry influence. We need a movement that refuses to accept that chronic disease is simply the price of modern life. The science, trademark, is telling us something. It's time we listen to it. Thanks a lot for listening to me, and I hope your take home here is that you decide to Get that stuff, all those stored materials out of plastic and into glass containers or stainless steel containers, and take care of yourself and your children. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, thanks. I mean, in 1967, there was a movie called The Graduate. I'm sure most of us have seen that. And they, made the argument that plastics was an incredible opportunity, that they were the future. But now we all know that they cause, like you said, significant harm, and that, we can't get rid of it now, but we can reduce it. And, plastics is not the future. We were going to publish a book, which we did later publish, called Plastic Free. And we had such a hard time because there's plastic in everything. And I didn't want to publish a book called Living Plastic Free that was filled with plastics. So we finally were able to make it minimal plastic, but it is so hard to get away from plastics. And we need to do it because we know that, there's going to be better and better science. Maybe it's not all there now, but there's enough of it that microplastics are a problem. And it's great to see an administration that's fighting it, that's teaching the public that they should try to avoid it, and that we can avoid chronic disease by having less of it in our lives. So thanks again for the work you're doing, for coming on the show, and for telling the truth.
Thanks, Tony.
Next up, we have Michael Afonso. He's running for Congress in Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District. Michael cares about medical freedom, nutritional reform, food freedom, and parental rights. And all of those things are exactly the same things we care about. So great to have you on. Thanks for joining us today, Michael.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be part of such an amazing panel of people. Senator Ron Johnson, he's my hometown senator. So it's great to see him here. But, I just want to take this chance to say one of the most exciting things about the Trump administration is the Maha movement. Almost everywhere I go, the number one issue for voters is affordability. And wrapped up in affordability is the rising cost of healthcare. So, as any politician or anyone watching this show probably knows, the second someone talks about reforming the healthcare industry, you're walking into a whole bee's nest of partisan problems. But that's where making America healthy again comes in. If we want to lower the cost of healthcare, what better way than focusing on prevention rather than treatment? And chronic disease is at a record high in the United States. So, I just have 3 easy plans. Number one, we need to make sure that our kids in schools have healthy options. These are all government funded programs. We need to make sure that people are having healthy food. And I'm about to be a father, so this one really hits home for me. Number two, we need to make sure we stop subsidizing the most unhealthy practices with the SNAP program. We need to make sure that only healthy options are available. Because you know what? If these people end up being unhealthy, we're going to be on the hook yet again for that. So we might as well encourage them to be making healthy choices. Number 3, here in northern Wisconsin, we've seen the small farms shrinking at a shocking level. And this is a scary thing for us Wisconsiners. Farming is a big industry here. And, I just want to see red tape cut so that local farmers can bring local produce to local stores and sell to local consumers, because that is where healthy food is found. It's not food that's been sitting on a shelf for 2 weeks to 2 years. And, I'll end with one thing. I went to school during COVID. It was the craziest time to ever go to school. I remember getting threatening emails because I refused a experimental gene therapy, and they were threatening academic probation. We need elected officials who are not going to forget about what happened during COVID, and they're going to hold these elected officials, these agency heads, and these private companies accountable for poisoning Americans. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on. Seems like you're doing great stuff. Hope to see much more of you.
Thank you.
So Michael has been, Michael and his wife, Envita, are expecting their first child this year. and, making the mission of Maha all the more personal and meaningful to their growing family. He wants to fight for parental rights so that parents can have autonomy over their children. And he wants to fix the school lunch program in this country, which is, really an abomination, and push health reform. And most importantly, he wants to fight for food freedom so that everyone has access to real, whole foods that nourish the body and don't lead to a lifetime of chronic disease. For all these reasons, we're thrilled to endorse Michael Afonso for Congress. He's truly a candidate who understands what it means to make America healthy. And we're looking forward to a victory for Michael, because a victory for Michael Afonso is a victory for all of us, for the Maha movement, for the Republican Party, and, for the whole country. So thanks so much. Thank you, Michael, for the work that you've done. But also, thanks to the Maha movement for working to get candidates like him elected this season. Next up, we have Gary Brecka, and he is the visionary founder of The Ultimate Human. He's a world-renowned human biologist, a biohacker, a longevity expert, and he travels around the world. But he's just doing incredibly important work and teaching people everywhere steps that they can take to become healthier, to lead healthier, happier lives. And nothing could be more important than that. So he's one of the loudest voices for the Maha movement. And, we're just so proud and glad to work with him and alongside him to make this country healthier. So thanks for coming on, Gary. Hey, Gary, we can't hear you.
I said some of your previous guests stole all my thunder. They did such a great job talking about microplastics and EMFs, which is what I came on to talk about today. I've been deep down the rabbit hole of EMFs and the possible damage at a cellular level to our cellular biology, and I'm absolutely convinced that we can mitigate them. It's much more difficult to block them. You essentially need a Faraday's cage, and it's very hard to walk around in a Faraday's cage. But at a very high level, we have multiple types of EMF frequency. We have low frequency EMF, like your power lines. We have radio frequency, which are phones and Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth. You have ionizing radiation, which I think we have very clear evidence for, X-rays, gamma rays, those kinds of things. And the trouble here that I've surmised from the research is not the signal itself, it's the constant variation in all of these signals. I mean, this is a very new age introduction to cellular biology. And this, the fraction that was around 50 years ago and the virtual absence of it 100 years ago shows you that we're just dealing with these altering frequencies. They run at different wavelengths, they run at different power levels. And what happens inside of our cells, the calcium channels and ion gating channels in our cells that move nutrients in and out of our cells, are constantly having to adjust to these varying frequencies. So it's not something you need to panic about, but we can do things by creating uniformity in these signals. A lot of really good EMF technology. I actually wear something called an Aries Tech around my neck on a necklace. You can get, there are plenty of companies that make similar things to Aries Tech. I just chose them. I have them in my bedrooms. I have them in my, I wear it on my necklace. It takes these very dispartite fields and makes them uniform so that your cellular biology is only dealing with a uniform constant on signal, not having to make these rapid adjustments. And if you look at what the World Health Organization has popularized with neurological disease and fertility. If you even look at some of the recent cell animal studies, which have proven increased oxidative stress, direct DNA damage, changes in calcium signaling, even altered gene expression. Now, these are animal studies, not human studies, but our cellular biology is very similar. But these are real. These are published. They're done in lab settings. I'm happy to make that research available to anybody who wants to see it. In 2018, the NTP published an animal study on gliomas and DNA damage. So I think it's something very real. I'm excited that the administration is even bringing it up and looking into ways that we can mitigate EMF frequency. I think mitigation is the answer, not blocking. Don't take tinfoil and put it over your routers. Don't get EMF blocking devices that block the back of your cell phone, because that's actually causing the transmitter to boost its signal coming out of the other side. So a lot of times when you try to damper an EMF signal, because of the way the technology works, it will amplify its attempt to connect to a tower. So this actually can make the situation worse. Things like mitigation, using scatter devices that scatter and make the field uniform. That's the way to lower your exposure to EMF. There's a lot of news around the 49ers, which lead the league in the NFL in non-contact injuries. It started 10 years ago, and for 10 years, they've dominated the league. And what happened 10 years ago and has allowed them to consistently be leading the league in non-contact injuries? Well, their practice field is right next to one of the biggest power stations in the state. And as soon as players started practicing there, you started seeing non-contact injuries go through the roof, specifically Achilles tears, which is, if you know anything about anatomy, Achilles tendons are very difficult to tear. This is not a common injury. This is like a cable. I also wanted to touch just for a minute on microplastics. I really applaud the administration for looking into microplastics and ways in our food supply that we could reduce our exposure to microplastics. I first got turned on to these in 2022. There was a blood study that was published that clearly showed microplastics showing up in different tissues, specifically lungs, the placenta, and stools. We know that particles in the body matter. We know this. They activate immune cells. They disrupt immune signaling. And much to the study that was just discussed in the New England Journal of Medicine, if you're a doubter of microplastics, this is an excellent study for you to reference, because they looked at atherosclerotic plaque that was removed from, I want to say it was carotid arteries, and they found polyethylene, they found PVCs. And in those patients that had high concentrations of these microplastic particles, they found a 4 times higher rate of heart attacks, stroke, and all-cause mortality because of their activation of macrophages and pro-inflammatory cytokines, these cytokines that we look for on lab values like IL-6 and TNF-alpha. So this is not pseudoscience. We really get accused very often of being pseudoscientists. There is absolutely groundbreaking studies that are accelerating at a rapid rate on both microplastics and EMFs. I think the answer is mitigation, not fear. Drinking out of glass bottled waters, getting water filtration in your home, and air filtration are excellent ways to mitigate your exposure to these. Modern life has us in contact with them regularly. I've actually done blood filtration, like in-use phoresis and therapeutic plasma exchange, where we measured the amount of microplastics that were taken out of my plasma. And much to what your earlier guest said, I took a full credit card worth of microplastics out of my body in a single filtration. So the fact the administration is looking at these, I applaud them for. And as I find more mitigation strategies in my research, I'm happy to share them with the Maha crowd. Thank you guys so much for having me today. Dr. Oz, I'm excited to hear you speak. And I look forward to just continuing the momentum we have.
Yeah, so before Dr. Oz comes on, Gary, I just want to say, EMF, microplastics, we have to stay humble and we have to slow down. We have to learn, like you said, to mitigate risk. And, every time you come on, we learn something more. And there's an endless amount to learn. And every time you talk about products, the first thing I do is I go and I research them. And 9 times out of 10, I go.
You're about to buy an Aries Tech necklace.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, that was the first thing I took a note on. So, we've had a generation of pseudoscience, of corporate corrupt science. And now we're getting radical transparency and real science. And that's what people have to recognize, that, not to trust the science, but to investigate and to look for real science. And that's what you've been doing. And I'm grateful. And I know, that everybody in the Maha movement is grateful for the work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Next up, we have Dr. Mehmet Oz. And, Dr. Oz, as you all know, he runs CMS and gives health coverage to 160 million people in this country. And he's been working incredibly hard to shift the focus from treatment to prevention and from drugs to nutrition. But he's also been trying to rid CMS and this country of waste, fraud, and abuse. And almost nothing could be more important, nothing that I can think of. And then he's fighting to make it easier and more affordable to be healthy in this country. So doing that, I'm sure that Russell Brand would agree that that is truly God's work. So thanks so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Tony, and congratulations on this wonderful event on Monday evening. Russell Brand, interesting ally because he's so sharp and so clever about so many deep, nuanced elements that makes life worth living. And I think he's absolutely right. If you automate some of the more difficult decisions in your life, for example, if you're going to get your morning rituals straight or you focus on the things that really matter, the smaller issues will take care of themselves. So I wanted to address two topics today. The first, I was in Miami a week and a half ago with Secretary Kennedy. We launched the dietary guidelines, these food guidelines that folks recognize now are getting rid of a lot of the bad science that has plagued the entire field for the last 50 years. And by flipping the pyramid back in the direction it was supposed to always have been, we've made some major changes in what expectations are around what healthy food really is, which is at its very core, eat nutrients. That's what your brain measures. Nutrients doesn't count calories. It counts nutrients. So if you give it the right nutrients, guess what happens? You stop eating. That's why, for example, eating nuts, which you should always keep in your pockets and around you, is a very wise thing to do. They're dense in calories, but they're even more dense in nutrients. So you don't eat that many of them, which is why trials continue to show their benefit. So let's translate that to the real world. Make these dietary guidelines, take some big stances, and the hospitals in this country don't necessarily have to do anything with those dietary guidelines. Even though they're the hubs of healing, they're the place where, conceptually anyway, the best ideas about staying healthy should be widely distributed. We often serve food, which it's almost a pejorative now to describe hospital food. By implication, it's terribly tasting, bland in its appearance, and it doesn't really do much for your body, except that it follows these very narrow numbers, like how many grams of salt or how many calories are in it. That's much less important when you're trying to give someone nutrients to recover from a major operation or deal with cancer, whatever the problem might be. So the dietary guidelines have pushed the hospitals into an interesting place. Many hospital leaders want to implement the dietary guidelines, and many are not sure how to get going. So to jumpstart the process, a week and a half ago, we wrote a letter to all the hospitals in America, and CMS is allowed to do this. Under the direction of Secretary Kennedy, we wrote a letter to all the hospitals saying, as part of your best treatment, your best care practices to patients, we expect you to use these dietary guidelines to the best of your ability. Now that forces hospitals to begin to deal with a lot of issues. Like, for example, how much more does it really cost to serve healthy food? And should you be making money in the food service? Well, turns out, based on Jeff Zakarian's work at Tampa General, that great chef makes great food, bespoke meals for the patients. They order them ahead of time. And despite all the things you might think would make it expensive, high quality local food, sourced whenever possible from the best vendors, and of course made bespoke, you would think that would cost a lot more money. It doesn't. It costs about 5% more, which is literally a rounding error when you're talking about a hospital budget. And why is it so little extra? Because turns out we throw away about a quarter of the food that we pay for to give you in a hospital because patients will not eat it. It doesn't taste good. I told Tony this recently. I'll share it with you. When I was in the ICU at Columbia as a resident training to do heart surgery, because you cannot leave these critically ill patients, they had to order one extra meal for the patients. So instead of 20 meals for 20 patients, they get 21 meals. That's for the doctor, the extra meal. And I was told by the chief residents in a whispered tone, don't eat the meals because you'll get sick. So I didn't get sick. Most everyone else did. The flus, the allergies, the insomnia, all that stuff never happened to me. And I think the meals that we're now putting into hospitals on the leadership of Secretary Kennedy and Secretary Rollins, who rolled these out with the dietary guidelines, of course, with AG, we now have a good program that's relatively easy to follow to how to get the average American to at least enjoy healthy food in the hospital, hopefully teach them some habits that they can take home with them. Now, there's lots of elements to actually activating this that are required. You've got to be able to source the food differently. You have to have people in the hospitals that are passionate about this or push for it. You need culinary nutrition. And by that, I mean, it's not about how many calories or grams of salt or, zinc amounts. That's math. That's not, it's chemistry. We're talking about culinary nutrition. Do what humans have always done. I'll give you one concrete example. If you take tomatoes and eat them raw, you don't really get much of the lycopene into your body. But if you're able to heat those tomatoes, and especially if you get rid of the skin because it interferes, and then maybe you put some fat on it, then that actually is a very good way of absorbing the lycopene in the tomato. That's also called pasta sauce. And so folks, if they actually make food the way historically we've prepared our meals, we'll get a lot of the benefit out of it. There's so much more I can speak to with the importance of bringing healthy food into our hospitals, but you should be demanding it from your local institutions. They've gotten letters from me on behalf of the secretary, and it's going to be a major move forward, especially as we go through the rest of this year. Next week, I hope we'll cover some of the fraud, waste, and abuse highlights that were mentioned by Tony a second ago. I'll just leave you with a number, $100 billion with a B, $100 billion of fraud within Medicare and Medicaid. If we were to use that money appropriately in Medicare, we could, for example, double the life expectancy of the Medicare Trust Fund, which means all of you who are working your tails off, knowing that Medicare will, or hoping that Medicare will be there for you when you retire, you won't have to guess, it'll be there, instead of expiring in 2031 as is currently predicted to do.
Wow. $100 billion. I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. But, let me just say that we've been plagued, yes, by waste, abuse, and fraud, but we've also been plagued by fraudulent science, and that we've had hospitals and schools serving food that poisons people, and an upside-down dietary guideline system, a SNAP program that encourages people to eat food that leads to a lifetime of chronic disease. And so I just want to thank you, Dr. Oz, for the incredible work you've been doing, fighting all of these lies and this corruption, and for making it easier and more affordable for people to lead healthier and happier lives. So I hope you have a great day.
You, Thank you. Take care.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us for yet another great episode of the Maha Media Hub, and for tuning in each week. And as always, thank you to all of our speakers for their insights, their dedication, and their contribution to the Maha movement. We at Maha, as I always say, we have powerful tools at our fingertips. We've got the Maha Report on Substack with over 200,000 followers, and we're looking to push that by year end to 2 million followers. And we've got the incredible Maha Institute roundtables. We've got the historic Maha Summit that's likely to be in late September. We've got the legislative tracker. We have Maha Films with Jeff Hayes. We have Maha Books. We have Maha parties, big events all around the country. We've got a mailing list of 2 million Maha warriors, and we're building that quickly now. We think we can build that to 20 million by the midterms. And that, I think, is going to be a big part of our push for the midterms. And then we've got thousands and thousands of influencers and with hundreds of millions of followers. So we're going to harness every bit of that power to fight to build the Maha movement in the most powerful, lasting organization that we can. And we have so many dedicated people doing that. And Americans overwhelmingly want this administration to fight to make America healthy. And we want to be partners in that battle. And we want to play a role front and center to make sure that we get the best possible outcome from an administration that we can see clearly is open to this. It's not going to be perfect. These battles are going to be really, really tough. And we're up, as I've said before, against some of the most powerful people, some of the most powerful companies on the planet. We want to talk to everybody. We want to try to convince every stakeholder of the importance of this mission. So following this call, you're going to get an email with a recording of this whole show and with important calls to action, which I hope you will take. And please share this content and help us to grow this powerful movement, this movement that is so essential to the future of America and to the future of mankind. So please follow the action steps that Children's Health Defense provides to protect our communities from unregulated cell tower proliferation. Please support HR 7050, which protects consumer access to homeopathic remedies. And, in this email, you're going to get contact information for your representatives. Please tell them to make the Farm Bill better. We at Maha Action proudly support American farms and farmers and the critical role that they play in feeding our nation. And we want Americans to eat more real food from American farmers. And, we want that to just grow. We want this to be powerful, to have as many farmers, stronger farmers, farmers that can make a profit by bringing healthy food to the public. So we want to see this farm bill passed. We want a strong farm bill, but we know it can be improved. Every bill can be improved, and we need to take out the provisions that weaken pesticide liability, because we think liability protection isn't good for anyone. It's not even good for the companies that get it, because it takes away this sort of safety signal. We want them looking at it time after time. We want them to balance the potential liability with the benefits. That's an important thing. It's something that they should want, that every American should want, that every family should want, because it's something that protects our children. So also join the People versus Poison rally on April 27th on the steps of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Go to the peoplespoison.org to sign up. That is ThePeopleBSPoison.org. Really important. There are going to be a lot of people there who have a diversity of views, but the thing we can all come together on is we do not believe in liability shields. Liability shields are anti-science. We need real science. We need transparency, and the science never ends. And we need to look at every different argument and make sure that we do the best for the American people, that we have radical transparency so that people can establish and decide for themselves what's good for them. So all of these steps will be, all of the things that we're fighting for, they're going to be clearly outlined in your follow-up email. And each one takes only a few minutes. So we really hope that you'll do it, because it can make a real difference. So thank you for joining us once again. And we look forward to seeing you next week and every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Hope you have a great week.
America's children are sick, and moms have been betrayed. The time for empty promises, long past. Now is a time for action. Maha is the most powerful force of collective action in generations. The grassroots power of moms and activists has created an army of health warriors with more reach than all mainstream media combined. Together, we can end the chronic disease epidemic. Maha's influence is reaching millions. It's reaching Congress. And that energy, these chain reactions, are working.
How about Operation Stork Speed?
Dozens of food companies removing toxic ingredients.
I plan to lead by example.
Maha is now.
We're talking about how to change the culture.
The American people want America healthy again.
There's a renaissance moment in health in America.
For health, freedom, and the truth. Join us at Maha Action.